we kind of miss by a few months, like it's really 2011, I'm not going to lose much sleep because it's only been half a century that we've actually known that there's been this agenda.
What do you think would be the kind of the nature of the data that they would present to us? Would that be in the form of we found ancient things pointing at intelligent life out there, or rather we have again something that is actually out there right now, so to speak? It's alive, it's out there.
Well, I think you have to look at how government, which desperately fears what they call an uncontrollable response. You have to look at how government handles crises, and they view this as a crisis. They obviously view giving the human race its real history a crisis, which to me is only a crisis if you've been lying to us, about everything for the last how many decades, and you think there's going to be a real political price to pay when you have to come out and say, well, it's not exactly as we have been telling you. Obviously, everyone has seen the film Independence Day, and there's that great scene on Air Force One where the president says there's not a darn thing we can do. We don't have any super technology. We can't stop these alien invaders. And one of his advisors, I guess the national security advisor, says to him, "Well, Mr. President, that's not exactly right regarding Area 51." I think we're dealing with a very similar scenario. And to bring it back around, I think my departed friend Arthur C. Clarke, who knew an awful and was connected at very high levels. Look, NASA named an entire space mission after him back in 2001 Mars Odyssey. So you got to believe that Arthur had some connections and some insight. And when he and Peter wrote that film and dubbed it The Year We Made Contact, I think we need to look more seriously at that timetable, because we know that most of this stuff is done on a ritual calendar, on a ritual clock, and we can get into some of the background there if you'd like. But that's why I have serious concerns and, shall we say, anticipation that this year, in fact, something pretty cool might unfold officially. And I can even be so bold as to tell you where I think the break might come.
Okay. Where is that?
I think Phobos. I think the information on this little tiny moon, this inner moon of Mars, which has been obviously leaked out of ESA, the European Space Agency, regarding an object which, by any measure now, by any scientific calibration analysis, if you look at all the data, it's overwhelmingly obvious to anyone who's objective that Phobos is not a rock, it's not a captured asteroid, it's not something that was assembled in Mars orbit by the natural forces billions of years ago, a solar system formation. It is, in fact, an ancient, incredibly damaged, battered, bashed, aged artificial object. And as we go through the process, as we go through this extraordinary revelation process, which I think is going to begin later this year, I think that's where they're going to start. Because if you put yourself in the driver's seat, if you put yourself in the minds of government people who are desperately concerned about uncontrollability and the uncontrollable reactions of peoples to the information that we in fact aren't alone, you have to start with something which is ancient, safely dead, removed in time so it poses no threat. It doesn't carry ray guns, et cetera, et cetera. So the two choices there to begin the unveiling process is either ancient artifacts, which is a huge step because that means intelligence, or if I was running the show, I would start with microbes. I would start with little beasties under the soil on Mars.
Yes.
And we're now hearing some very interesting rumblings that NASA may be about to reveal that one of its spacecraft on Mars actually found current microbial life. And the fact that that would be an official announcement would be shocking, because it would move us from we're the only living things in the universe, everything here on Earth, to a position where, well, we're the only living things on Earth that are intelligent, but there's a planet right next door that has, microbes on it. Then a few months later, you might move the goalposts and say, oh, and by the way, there's this pretty amazing artificial object, bashed and battered and very ancient and obviously no threat, orbiting Mars. And we're going to be investigating that with robots in the next few months and, year or so. And so you move the political goalposts safely from one area of non-concern to another area of greater non-concern, but you don't get to the prize, which is live extraterrestrials running around visiting us in spaceships and things that go bump in the night until well down the road. And I would pin that politically as probably the mythical 2012 date.
Really?
Well, if this is a clock, if this is a timetable, if this is a carefully controlled release, then the prize would be 2012, because all the mythologies say that that's when something really big is supposed to happen, and consciousness-wise, there would be nothing bigger in human history than the discovery of actual real flesh and blood beings that inhabit the same space that we do.
Well, that's just incredible. And in terms of the slow trickle, you couldn't be, I think, more right in terms of Mars and how they've kind of handled that situation, back and forth in terms of water and various, life. They've been going back and forth on that. They're releasing, we think it is life. It might not be. And at this stage, people are more or less, I think, comfortable, so to speak, with that idea. It wouldn't come to people as a great shock, I think, anymore, right?
Oh, if NASA came out tomorrow or next week, and obviously if you want to really play this game, you have to pick a ceremonial date, one of these, mythical Masonic ritual dates. I would not be surprised at all if when NASA says officially, such and such a mission, and I'll even pick one, I think it's going to be the Phoenix mission to the North Pole that they lost last year, because there are now rumblings about Phoenix, and we know from our own research and separate investigation that there's some pretty interesting things that occurred around the Phoenix mission. If that mission were to suddenly say, and we've been processing our soil analyses, remember they found ice under the spacecraft, and they had experiments on board specifically to detect living organisms, and we never really got a reading on what those instruments and those experiments found, did we?
No.
But if they were to begin later this year with that announcement, that would give you about 2 years, 1.5 years, in terms of a run-up before the really important date, which is 2012. So, I am loosely interpreting Arthur's subtitle on 2010, the year we make contact. It doesn't necessarily mean, contact with guys landing on the White House lawn in a bright, shiny spaceship. It means contact with the idea that the human race is not alone, in my interpretation, officially sanctioned by official agencies, space agencies around the world, and I think you're going to see it start with microbes and then move rapidly to archaeology, and the archaeology now that is overwhelmingly convincing to any objective observers when they look at these images of Phobos from the ESA spacecraft from Mars Express, and you basically see what is a battered but constructed object with all kinds of geometry indicative of artificial origins.
These things about clues in terms of disclosure and knowledge, and beginning with Phobos, obviously have been ignited already, actually, if you look at what Freemason Buzz Aldrin mentioned in terms of Phobos on C-SPAN. Tell us about that, Richard.
Yes, Henrik, that's very, very perceptive, because I think that Buzz Aldrin is a stalking horse for exactly the timetable and the methodology that I've just described. It's very curious that 40 years to the day from when human beings landed on the moon, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin, in 1969, that memorable summer that I will never forget, because I was a very young science guy working for a major American network, the CBS television network, and Walter Cronkite, the most illustrious name in television news in the 20th century. I was in that position to observe what happened as we walked on the moon. As I was telling Buzz just the other night on another radio show that I do called Coast to Coast AM, I watched with Robert Heinlein as he and Neil were galloping and gallivanting around the lunar surface on those, hazy, ghost-like black and white images. But 40 years, literally to the day that event occurred, Mr. Aldrin, Colonel Aldrin, soon I hope to be General Aldrin, because I'm starting a campaign to get all these astronauts who went to the moon promotions and citations as honorary lunar ambassadors. I think it is tremendously overdue that we honor